Hello, my name is Amanda Bradford and I'm going to be your pastry chef instructor. Today we're going to talk about gluten formation. So, what is gluten? We all know it, we hear it, it's definitely a hype word in our society. It's basically two proteins, glutenine and gliadine, and they're activated when you add water to them. The water is absorbed with the proteins and it creates our mesh structures, which are our glutens. So it's very important to understand the function of glutens and how to control it when you're making breads and cakes and cookies, because that's going to affect your final product. So there are some ways that we can control our gluten formation. So one way would be the flour. So if we have a low protein flour, like a cake flour, it's going to minimize our gluten production. If we have a high protein flour, such as bread flour, it's going to maximize our gluten production, which means it's going to make more of it and it's going to make that pastry more structurally sound, which is your breads. Mixing methods are another way that we can control how much gluten is formed. So if we want to minimize gluten, we want to use a method like a chiffon method, where we fold our flour into our batter and then we stop. Or a biscuit method, which is our fat and our flour, we mix it till it just comes together and that's it. No one likes a tough biscuit, so we definitely want to minimize how much time we're spending on that dough, so that way the gluten does not form and it doesn't make that tough, chewy biscuit that nobody likes. Yeast bread mixing serves to develop the gluten structure. Those are your bread doughs. So those are the ones you have in the mixer. They're gonna mix around for a really long time and they're gonna develop those really strong gluten structures, which is your window pane that we talk about when we talk about breads. Water is another contributing factor. Gluten can't form unless it has water, but you can also overhydrate your gluten proteins. So it can only absorb so much. So if you add a high hydration, that's gonna make a more tender cake. So that's why you see those doughs and those batters have high hydration, because we don't want a lot of gluten in them. Other ingredients that can affect our gluten formation are gonna be sugar. It's hygroscopic, which means it's gonna absorb water. So it's gonna leave less water available to develop your glutens. And then fat. Fat is gonna coat your proteins, which is going to inhibit water to get to them. So those doughs are also gonna have a different gluten structure as opposed to a baguette that has no fat. You can compare it to a cinnamon roll that has fat and sugar, which means there's less water available for those proteins, which results in a more tender dough. The last thing we're gonna talk about is salt. So salt actually strengthens gluten and it allows those strands to be longer and more elastic. So I want to show you what I'm talking about when I talk about strands and elasticity and things to that effect. So in this bowl, I have some flour and some water, and I've been mixing it for quite a while. So you can see the elasticity in this dough. So this would be a pretty structurally sound dough. This is gonna be like your sourdough. It's gonna be crusty on the outside, chewy on the inside. This is definitely not what we would want a cake batter to look like, because we don't want it to have that consistency. We want it to be light and tender. I hope that this was helpful for you guys and will be a great starting point when we get into our next subject, which will be breads and cakes.